I was going to say something else at the beginning, but having had this experience of being a TED talker, I think every organisation should make their organisation do a TED talk, because you get enormous space and you fill it with all the things that you're passionate about. And you have someone to contain that space. It's not infinite space, it's space that's got a container around it. David and Felicity and Ed, all sort of holding my hand as I went through this process of developing my TED talk. But I'm human, and I don't just fill my mind with creative, wonderful things. I also fill it with all my fantasies. I can be narcissistic, I can be overly optimistic. So I caught myself thinking once, dare I say this, maybe this video clip will go viral, and I'll get emails, and I'll be famous. Stop it, Tim. And then, in the middle of the night, or maybe not even the middle of the night, I also had thoughts, what I'm talking about is not interesting. And the way that I present this talk is also not going to be interesting. So I went down as well. And I guess I'm talking about how can you bring the opportunity, if you want to call it this, for that kind of spaciousness where you can have all of these feelings. And it's managing these feelings and being yourself that actually develops a human being. Another moment from my life, if you like, and this is the light bulb day, the light bulb moment day. Not so much a light bulb moment, because I was 4 at the time, and that's nearly 60 years ago. It's a candle day. And I persuaded my mother that I needed to have space, particularly from my 1-year-old pesky sister. And I persuaded her to light a candle and give me this candle and to let me have the front room to myself with the lights off. I was going to sing a little song, something like, candle burning bright. And I went in there, I was frightened. I was frightened of the dark. And you imagine how frightened my mother was. Little boy at 4. Candle, hot wax, new furniture, best room in the house. But when I'd sung my little song, and I'd got over my fear of the dark and being on my own, and realized that I was okay, it was the most beautiful moment as these shadows flicker across the wall from the candle. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that we all need these moments of spaciousness that have a space around them, a container, if you like, where we can develop, where we can have light bulb moments, if you like. Another image for you, and this is from Gravity. Surviving Space is the name of this talk. Gravity, the film, you might remember, Sandra Bullock, newbie to the space world. She's frightened. She has to do a spacewalk to fix something. And George Clooney, the expert, the experienced astronaut, talks her through it. And he teaches her, well, he doesn't teach her actually, he just provides a container for her to manage her anxiety. I don't know if any of you have seen the film on the big screen. It is absolutely frightening. You get a sense of how big infinity actually is and what it will be like doing a spacewalk. A catastrophe happens, and she takes that experience of space with George into an experience where she's able to think, where she's able to survive, and where she's able to be very creative. I won't spoil the story in case you haven't seen the film. I suggest you see it. So why am I making these points about space? I guess for most of the skills that we need these days in leadership teams, like being a leader, authenticity, resilience, we need to know ourselves. And the only way really that we can get to know ourselves is not by someone training us to know ourselves or training us to be a leader. It's actually to be putting us in situations where we have to be ourselves. And if we be ourselves, then we get feedback about that from the people we're with. And we get to learn how to be ourselves and make use of ourselves, practice being ourselves. But why aren't all organizations providing space like this where they have someone come along who is an expert in surviving space, to help them through this process of being themselves in space, because we're all afraid of space. None of us likes it. We all fill our space, particularly these days, with all sorts of gadgets and entertainment, drugs and food and books and whatever. None of us, I think it was made in one of the earlier talks by Sarah, none of us much sits down and does nothing. So we're very frightened of space. I think we always have been for millennia, but particularly so at the moment. However, back in the day, in 1942, this form of staff development was developed by a man called Wilfred Bion. And he was a psychiatrist in the army, in the British Army. And his job was to deal with battle exhaustion, or soldiers who were suffering what was then called battle exhaustion. In the First World War, it's called shell shock. In the Vietnam War, it was called PTSD. Then it was called battle exhaustion. And he evolved something called the Northfield Experiment. Northfield was an old Victorian hospital taken over by the army, and his job as a psychiatrist was to help get better 600 men. Now you can imagine 600 men, they've all been at the front. They couldn't care less, actually. They're slovenly. They're not happy with themselves because they're effectively shell-shocked. They know that if they get better, they're back to the front. If they don't get better, then they go out into civilian life probably feeling a failure, probably feeling like maybe even that they're not a proper man. So they're all faced with a dilemma. And beyond it being the army, could have gone a number of ways. He could have used discipline, not going to work. He could have trained them, probably not going to work either. So what he decided to do was give them space, a lot of space, and dignity. And he set up a number of things in this ward of 600 men. And I won't go into the detail because it's a whole TED talk in itself, but it's a fascinating thing that he did. But from it came a whole load of theories, came a whole load of ways of thinking about people in groups and teams and organizations, and a whole load of ways of working with those groups and teams and organizations that basically provided space with not an expert in what those people did, but an expert in surviving space, someone who was okay with space and okay with a bunch of people in space. So what does that look like if I say go into an organization? From an individual point of view, I worked with a man, an individual man. What else can a man be but an individual? I worked with a man, and he didn't think he could be a leader. He was good at his job, he was well-trained, well-educated, but he didn't see himself as being what he thought a leader was, sort of alpha male, outward-going sort of a person. But when he was given the opportunity to be in a space where he could lead, what he found was that people loved him as a leader. He was steady, he was reliable, everybody could come to him, he had their ear, they had his ear, and he gave them space to talk and be creative. Second example, a mediation I did the other week. A couple of people and a very difficult situation. A situation that these days is making news and therefore very sensitive. And I could have read a lot of books about mediations. And I could have read a lot of books about this particular sort of mediation with this sort of situation. I decided not to. And the three of us sat and we talked about what had happened and the various versions of that. And at one stage, one of them said to me, "Tim, I don't want to do any more of this puddling around. I want to get somewhere and do something." I said, "Well, I'm afraid puddling around is what we've done so far, and it's gone pretty well. You've said stuff, and you've felt stuff, and we've all experienced stuff. So let's just keep going." And we did. And I think neither of those people had any expectations of what would come out of it. In fact, very low expectations. I had hopes, but I didn't have high expectations. But I think they were both blown away by what that puddling around actually did. When they were given space in a room together with someone who was willing to puddle with them, they were able to shake hands and they were able to be in the same room together. A third example, where you have a leadership team in an organization, and I was asked to come in and work with this team on their communication with each other and their honesty with each other. And again, I was providing space for them, and I saw them all individually, and I thought, these people are all very honest, and they're all very communicative. It's got to be something that's going on in the team. And indeed it was. One of them in the team made sure that any communication was shut down very quickly. And whilst I'm assured that he had no intention of doing that, and he was doing it for the good of the team, probably felt he had to keep them safe. Fundamentally, he wanted to keep control of what was going on. And I think that's why we're unwilling to provide space for ourselves, or why organizations are unwilling to provide space for this kind of development of human beings. So what am I saying in this very brief talk? 12 minutes, if you remember what I said at the beginning. That's a hell of a container. I'm trying to say that we hate space and we don't much like thinking, actually. And we'd rather not change. But if we provide space, then people do get to be themselves. If we don't fill it with things that they should do and must do and how they should be, they be themselves, like it or not in a way. And when they're themselves, they develop. And they become accustomed to themselves, feel proud of who they are, and they get to use who they are, not who they think they should be or who they think somebody else wants them to be. And really just to conclude now, when people are themselves, everybody forms like a piece of a jigsaw when you put them together. And my experience has been is that when you provide space and when people are themselves, the things that happen are beyond the imagination of those individuals and the organization they belong to. Something wonderful happens where they all pull together, they all be themselves, they provide leadership for and of each other. They develop, and of course, they have light bulb moments. Thank you.